Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Mark's Gospel, chapter 9, and this is going to be, to me, excited. I kind of love this story of the Transfiguration only because, uh, you know, um, an interesting thing happened where Moses and Elijah shows up to chat with Jesus. And there's some things I want to unpack with this. I'm sorry, uh, unpack it when we went through Matthew, and I want to do it again, and I'll do it again with Luke, because Luke would even tell us what they talked about. Okay, so but this is a very interesting. It's going to be an interesting um, um, story. Okay, so let's jump in it. All right, here we go. All right, let's see. Uh Mark chapter 9. Now, also let me also do a um all right, here we go. Oh, should have done it. Okay, let me do a one of my pet peeves here. Chapter headings and verses are not inspired. Okay? Chapter heading and verses are not inspired. Though they are good for references. In other words, um, here's an example in I think it's Luke 4. Jesus goes to the temple, I think in Capernaum, and then they give him the scroll to read, the scroll of Isaiah. And back then, scrolls were like these long, rolled up parchments. Okay, so they wasn't broken down. They were just, written. So you had to find the place. So when Jesus unrolled it, he had to find the place in Isaiah that he wanted to reference. Well, chapter headings and verses help us quickly, So like now I can go, 9, chapter 1. The problem, however, is that for the life of me, I don't understand why they did not give more thought to not breaking up thoughts. Okay, and this is a good example here that either chapter 9 should have started where verse 2 is. Why would they put chapter 9 and verse 1? Why would they put it here and forget the heading there? Because that's, again, all of the verses and chapter headings were added centuries after the writings, of the scriptures. And of course, these headlines here were even added by Bible publishers. Okay, so this is just a good example, and again, it's just a pet peeve that I have. So verse 9 says, "Then he said to them." So again, he kind of broke up the thought what Jesus was saying, and which is kind of uh, really fits here when he was again given the sternness of committing to him. Verse 37: "What can a man give in exchange for his life? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he come in the glory of his Father with his holy angels." Then he said to them, "I assure you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God come in power." So the question is, what did he mean by that? Well, actually, he's getting ready to start. So, all right, verse 2, and I think this is where chapter 9 should have began, but okay. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John. And if you notice, he took Peter, James, and John a lot with him. These three saw more than they saw and heard more than any of the other 9 disciples. Okay. It's not necessarily, we're not told why, but they were. Certainly Peter, well, James would be one of the three pillars as you go into the book of Acts, but he is martyred, actually martyred early on in chapter 12. Peter is martyred around, I think it's 80, 65-ish, somewhere around there. And then the Apostle John lives towards the end of the first century. And then he actually hands over, you could say he kind of hands it over to the next generation of Christian leaders, church leaders. So it says, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up on a high mountain by themselves to be alone. He was transformed. All right, now there may be some debate as to the translators here. I'm using the Holman Christian Standard Bible. And so there's the things about the Holman Christian Standard Bible that, people kind of question. So in the other translations, like the King James, it says transfigured. Okay, so and what transfigured sort of means is that what was in came out. Okay, and they elected here to use excuse me, transform. All right, since I'm not a scholar, I won't engage in that debate. He was transformed in front of them. His clothes became dazzling, extremely white. I'm going to make a joke here. This is probably why all of the pictures look, so you see bright white clothes. But his clothes became white. In other words, everything about him became white. And then he said, as no lauder on earth could whiten them. We would say bleach, right? Could whiten them, okay? But look at this. Elijah appeared to them with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. This always amazes me. Because first and foremost, Elijah had been dead for nearly 8 centuries. Moses had been dead for nearly 9 centuries. And here they are talking with Jesus. Luke even tells us what they were talking about his death that he was going to accomplish. What I want to kind of what's interesting here that gives us a glimpse when we ask the question, what happens when we die? This is a glimpse. That here you have these two biblical figures that show up. Now, another thing is, so think about this. What are we looking at? Well, let me rephrase. If you're Peter, James, and John, what were they looking at? And we have the revelation that it was Elijah and Moses, but what are we looking at? And this kind of gives us some insight to who we are, what we are, what happens after we die. So let me quickly go through it. One, first, we are a spirit, we have a soul, and then we live in a we live in a body. Okay, because of the fallen state, because of Adam's sin, then our bodies no longer sustain eternal life. So they wear out, being a part of the corrupt world around us. That's why we physically die. Death itself doesn't mean, well, the root meaning of death is separation. So in the case of spiritual death, we were separated, alienated from God. And in the case of physical death, our inner man, and this is what we're looking at, their inner man, their spirit. So their spirit and their souls are separated from their physical bodies. That's what happened at death. At death, when you die, your body, for whatever reason, can no longer sustain life, or it is violently, ejected, like a car crash or something like that. Or you can just say old age, right? It gets to a place that sometimes old age. Just, you just die. Okay. And so that's what happens. So then what happens then after we die? There is no loss of consciousness. See, there's no loss of consciousness. So we have glimpses throughout the Bible. For example, King Saul, that was called by spiritualists to come. And when he came up, and I know a lot of people get debate over that story, we won't engage it here. But the fact that Saul came up, and what is it that we saw? We saw his spirit form, his inner man. You look in the book of Revelations, you see the souls of those who have been martyred, executed. So they are separated from their bodies, but their inner man. They're their inner man. Paul puts it this way: to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Well, what is present with the Lord? To be right now. So before the Old Testament, there was kind of a holding place, not one of suffering. Jesus gives us a glimpse in Luke 16 with the difference between the rich man and the poor man. The rich man was in Abraham's bosom. The poor man was in Abraham's bosom. The rich man was on the other side of the gulf at that time. That was in Hades. He was in torment. The rich man was comforted. But when he looked up, he saw what are we looking at? The inner man. And two, in each case, there's no loss of consciousness, memory. Which to me, if you read the Bible, then there are those who believe in what is called soul sleep. They believe that you kind of like sleep in the ground. You're just in the ground. You're in the grave. That they believe that all the bodies in the grave right now are actually in their soul. It's just no consciousness. No scriptures for that. I'll take that back. There are scriptures that that would hint for that, and you could say, okay, if you read all the scriptures, this is why you compare all scriptures. So that I'm trying to think. I think it's in Ecclesiastes, something like about when the dead doesn't know. You got scriptures like the dead doesn't know. And again, I'm not going to get too deep into that, but again, you balance that out about then what's going on here. And then, of course, if you believe that the inner man, that the incomplete man is just in the grave right now, so that means at some point, and this is what you have to think about, that at some point, then you would have to say that when the body turns to dust, what's left? So then you got to say that the spirits are then in the coffins, right? They're in the coffins. But then what about those who die eaten by animals, die in a fire, die in explosions? So what happened to them? All right. So, but we now that Jesus has died and rose again, as Paul says, to be absent from the body is to be present from the Lord. So death is what causes us to be absent from the body. So then we are present with the Lord. That's what happens. We are present with the Lord. But I can imagine Elijah and Moses. Now we have a glimpse right here, and I can only use my imagination. That here you have, they're talking. They're talking with Jesus. So certainly when they left Jesus, did they go back to a soul sleep? Right? And that, again, that kind of gives us a glimpse. So when you kind of wonder what one of your loved ones are doing, they're talking. They're talking to somebody, right? And notice that there's no kind of, delusion, or not confusion with them. Another, they appeared. They're talking with Jesus. Wow. Okay. So I give us a little glimpse. That's all. I'll give us a little glimpse as to, what happens when we die. in the Lord. Okay, now if you're not in the Lord, different story. So, like if you was to die right now, you can imagine that you would be talking to loved ones. You were talking to the saints right now, because to be absent with the body, to be present with the Lord. And in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, it says that God is going to bring with them those who have fallen asleep. There's a lot of glimpses that we have. The one thing is that it doesn't seem to be boring or dread. All right, so they see this, and watch this. Then Peter's, so when they wake up and they see Jesus now, right? And they see Jesus talking to Moses and Elijah. And then it says, then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles. Now here's Peter messes up. Why would you want to make a tabernacle? Tabernacles are places of worship. That's the whole point of the tabernacles. They were little tents. They were portable tents that you would make. The tabernacle in the Old Testament during the 40 years of wandering was a kind of a big portable tent. He says, now let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Why, Peter? Why would you want one for Moses and Elijah? And then he said, because he did not know what he should say, and so they were terrified. That I can understand, but of course, all right, be quiet. Verse 7, a cloud appeared overshadowing them, and a voice came from the cloud. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus alone. So that's the message. You're focusing on man. That's because you see something and you're focusing on making a tabernacle for Moses and Elijah. Why? Right? You shouldn't. And so notice again, and this voice here that God again affirms that Jesus, listen to him. This is my beloved son. This is the one in whom I'm pleased. Listen to him. Not man. And even though you see this man, you could say in an elevated height, they're elevated because of Jesus. That's why Elijah and Moses is there, because of Jesus. Verse 8, then suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus alone. And as they were coming down from the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one what they have seen until the Son of Man had been risen from the dead. Now, it's not a long period of time, right? It's just, I think just like now, we're coming to the very end, very close, when Jesus is going to die. So it's not like this was a secret that was held long. So they kept the word to themselves, discussing what the rising from the dead means. Now, again, it's kind of interesting because Jesus had been telling them several times about he was going to rise from the dead, and they're going, "What does that mean, right? What does it mean that he's going to rise from the dead?" So then he said, then they begin to question him. Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? He said, Elijah does come first and restores everything. He replied, how then is it written about the Son of Man that he must suffer many things and be treated with contempt? So Jesus kind of throws this in there. Yeah, Elijah is coming, but wait a minute. Well, what about the scriptures about what it says about the Son of Man? And they're kind of like just kind of dead to that. There's no cognitive catching on here. But then he says, but I tell you that Elijah really has come and they did whatever they pleased with him, as it is written. So they did whatever they want. Now he's referring to John the Baptist. Okay? He's referring to John the Baptist, that he was a Elijah type. And of course the question comes to it that when this language is used, does it mean that Elijah actually is coming back? Some people believe this because Elijah went into heaven, and then it is believed that he did not die. However, let me say that it doesn't necessarily mean that it never said that Elijah did not die. It said he was taken to heaven. His body, something could have happened to his body in transit there, right? And so that's why a lot of people think that Elijah is going to come back. Even the 2 witnesses in Revelation chapter 11 is believed to be either Moses and Elijah or Elijah and Enoch, because neither one of them is reported to have died. Okay. Now, so again, I think this is one of the most, we see that Jesus, some of the most powerful revelations, powerful miracles that are done right before Jesus at the end of his ministries right here. Now, the crowd never saw the transfiguration, but 3 people saw it, and Peter would later write about it in his epistles. He says, we saw his glory on the Holy Mount. So this is all just a testimony. And in this case, 3 of his apostles saw this and were able to give witness by signs and wonders that, yeah, that Jesus is the Son of God, the Messiah, the Savior. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.